Hi everyone, good evening. For the last 3 years, it has been as clear as daylight that all is not well on the India-China front. The standoff in eastern Ladakh has now continued for 3 years. For 3 years, 50,000 Indian and Chinese soldiers have stood on both sides of the border. This after China ingressed into Indian territory in 6 areas in eastern Ladakh. 19 Corps Commander level talks have yielded limited success, and much hope had been pinned on the BRICS Summit in Johannesburg. Prime Minister Modi and Xi Jinping did meet 2 days ago. But 2 days on, 2 very different versions of that one meeting are now emerging from both sides. It is reflective of the deep divide between the two sides despite all the photo ops. First, India and China differed on what was agreed to in the meeting. In a press statement, the Foreign Secretary of India noted, and I quote, the two leaders agreed to direct their relevant officials to intensify efforts at an expeditious disengagement and de-escalation. Then, the Chinese issued a statement. They called the Xi-Modi talks, and I quote, candid and in-depth. But there was no mention of disengagement or de-escalation.
In a conversation with President Xi Jinping of China, Prime Minister highlighted India's concerns on the unresolved issues along the LAC in the western sector of the India-China border areas. Prime Minister underlined that the maintenance of peace and tranquility in the border areas and observing and respecting the LAC are essential for the normalization of the India-China relationship. In this regard, the two leaders agreed to direct their relevant officials to intensify efforts at expeditious disengagement and de-escalation. In all, Prime Minister's visit to Johannesburg, still continuing, has already been very fruitful and productive.
That wasn't all. There is now a mini spat over who actually called for this meeting. The Chinese Foreign Ministry has issued a handout that claims that the Indian side had requested for this meeting. Let me quote from that readout. President Xi Jinping talked with Indian Prime Minister Narendra Modi on the sidelines of the BRICS Summit at the latter's request on August 23rd. So this was the Chinese version, which is on your screens. Now, the Indian side is yet to respond to this claim officially, but unofficially, it has been conveyed via sources that the Chinese had asked for a formal, structured, bilateral meeting, which India declined. But India did request for an informal meeting, and that's the informal meeting that has taken place in South Africa. Sure enough, a political war of words broke out here in India. Leading the charge, Rahul Gandhi and Asaduddin Owaisi.
आखिर क्यों प्रधानमंत्री चाइनीज प्रेसिडेंट के पीछे भाग रहे हैं बातचीत के लिए? आखिर क्यों देश के प्रधानमंत्री देश को अंधेरे में रख रहे हैं कि लद्दाख बॉर्डर पर क्या हो रहा है? आखिर क्या वजह है कि भारत के प्रधानमंत्री की सरकार, नरेंद्र मोदी की सरकार, हमारी बहादुर फौज पर ये प्रेशर डाल रही है कि कोई सोल्यूशन को एक्सेप्ट कर लिया जाए? और वो क्यों नहीं इस बात का इसरार कर रही है कि जो स्टेटस को एंटे था 2020 में, उसको रिस्टोर किया जाए? आखिर क्यों देश की बीजेपी की सरकार चीन की फौज को रिवॉर्ड या इनाम देना चाहती है?
तो एक बात बिल्कुल साफ है कि चाइना ने हिंदुस्तान की जमीन ली है। हजारों किलोमीटर जमीन हिंदुस्तान की चाइना ने हमसे छीनी है। और दुख की बात है कि हिंदुस्तान के प्रधानमंत्री ने ऑपोजिशन की मीटिंग में कहा कि हिंदुस्तान का 1 इंच किसी ने नहीं दिया है। ये सरासर झूठ है। लद्दाख का हर व्यक्ति इस बात को जानता है कि लद्दाख की जमीन चाइना ने हिंदुस्तान से ली है और प्रधानमंत्री जी सच नहीं बोल रहे।
राहुल गांधी जी आदतन फितरतन भारत के बारे में, भारतीय समाज के बारे में, राष्ट्रीय स्वयंसेवक संघ के बारे में और इन सब से बढ़कर बात की बात में चीन के बारे में आधारहीन और अनर्गल बयान देने के आदी हो गए हैं। परंतु मुझे समझ में नहीं आता है कि राहुल गांधी जी को बार बार चीन की बातों पर इतना प्यार क्यों उमड़ आता है। ये राजीव गांधी फाउंडेशन को मिले हुए दान का एहसान है या चीन की कम्युनिस्ट पार्टी के साथ हुए करार का इकरार है कि बार बार वो भारत सरकार से तकरार करने को तैयार रहते हैं।
Okay, we'll forget the politics for a moment and look at the situation that has arisen out of the Prime Minister Modi Xi Jinping visit in South Africa. Lieutenant General D.S. Hooda is joining us on the broadcast. He's a former Army commander, Northern Command. General Hooda, good to have you on the show. Suhasini Haidar is a foreign affairs expert. She's joining us on the broadcast as well. So, Hasni, I'm going to start with you. Have you been able to make sense of what exactly has happened in the meeting? Because we are getting two very different versions on A, what was agreed upon, and B, even who actually asked for this meeting, called for this meeting. Two very different versions. We don't know who to believe.
Absolutely. Well, Shreya, I think it's an unnecessary controversy started by China in its statement because in diplomatic terms, it is very seldom put out as to who initiated the request for contact. From what we understand, it is quite clear, according to both sides, that yes, the informal meeting between Prime Minister Modi and President Xi Jinping that happened on Wednesday, which was in the lounge, the informal lounge just off the BRICS Summit leaders area, was requested by India, but India had denied an earlier Chinese request for a bilateral meeting, for a structured meeting. And I think you reported on that. I think, as I said, it's an unnecessary controversy because it doesn't really matter. After all, India and China are engaging at various levels. The foreign ministers have met, the defense ministers have met, the national security advisors have met, the military commanders are meeting and continue to meet at the LAC. So I don't really think too much is to be gained by who actually asked whom. As I said, it's a controversy that's been generated, and of course, the back and forth just shows how divergent India and China are, that even basic diplomatic niceties are not actually being followed at this time. I think what's of more worry is the fact that there was one statement on the record by Foreign Secretary Vinay Quatra and a very different statement coming out of China in print, as you have pointed out, that say very different things, because it's not just about who said what or whether it's he said and he versus he said. It is what was the outcome of the talks. If on the Indian side, the outcome of the talks appeared to be, from what Mr. Quatra said, that both leaders had directed the relevant officials to disengage and de-escalate expeditiously. They're talking on the Indian side about this happening very quickly. Then why was that not reflected on the Chinese side? And does that mean that actually the Chinese side does not intend to follow through on this expeditious disengagement and de-escalation? And I think there is a case to be made that why is India making that concession, essentially moving ahead, talking about maintenance of the line of actual control in the future, talking about the need to respect the LAC, obviously in the future, and not talking about the status quo ante being restored as of April 2020, when the standoff began, when the Chinese transgressions began, that then led to the Galwan killings. Those are a matter of worry. Why is the Chinese side not echoing this? I think at the moment, we are waiting for the Ministry of External Affairs to really put out more on this particular meeting. And the last point I will make is that one of the reasons why we've had this kind of very, very hazy details coming out of each of the meetings is because they are not on the record. That they are essentially informal chats. A year ago, in November, Prime Minister Modi met with President Xi Jinping at a banquet of the G20. At the time, everyone saw the video. The MEA said it was just an exchange of courtesies. 8 months later, the MEA said, actually, they discussed stabilizing the boundary. Now, these things arise really because these are not sit-down structured meetings between the two sides where people are taking notes. Maybe there is a reason to not yet do that bilateral structured meeting. Of course, Prime Minister Modi and President Xi are expected to meet again in the next few weeks at various summits as well. And it remains to be seen whether what they have spoken about in Johannesburg is actually being taken forward at the LAC.
General D.S. Hooda, just come in here. Over the last 3 years, we've heard these words over and over again. Disengagement, de-escalation, de-induction. The ultimate goal, of course, will be status quo ante. That is not something that finds mention in the Indian statement either. But, you know, when India releases that handout saying that both leaders have agreed that, you know, people who are in charge need to quickly start looking at disengaging and possibly, you know, de-inducting as well, you think China will really follow through? It's been 3 years. There have been 19 co-commander level talks. There has been partial success, some success on the ground as far as disengagement is concerned, but that's a long way off from de-induction and status quo ante.
So Shreya, just before I come to your question, you know, this whole business of status quo ante, I think that time has passed. So we cannot get back to status quo ante because there were no you know, areas where troops had disengaged. The whole concept of buffer zones has come into place. So I don't think, you know, we are going to see the LAC as it was prior to, say, May 2020. I think that's something that we need to understand. On the issue of whether China is going to go ahead with, you know, disengagement from Depsang and Demchok, which are the two places left, I personally, and this is I mean, there's been so much conversation about this. Initially, you know, if you recall when Corps Commander level meeting started, it was that, you know, we are not going to discuss Depsang at all. That was the conversation that was being made. Now, after disengagement has taken place at other places, and we are finally discussing Depsang, we've had numerous meetings on this. WMCC meetings, political level meetings, as Suhasini pointed out, between the NSA's foreign ministers. We've had on-ground Corps Commander level meetings. I think Depsang particularly is going to be very tricky. And at the end of the day, if the Chinese pull out from everywhere that they had come in 2020, I mean, what have they proved? What have they justified? You know, why have they been there for 3 years? In territory that is claimed by India. So I think particularly Depsang is going to be difficult, and perhaps the statements that have been made, you know, by our foreign ministry and the Chinese foreign ministry on this meeting at Johannesburg possibly reflects that it's not going to be easy to pull out. So, and my last point is, I think we need to just stand firm. We've had, as I said, numerous meetings. We just, you know, sort of, if we show any sort of weakness and we want to step back and say, you know, let's agree to some disengagement which puts us at a disadvantage, I think that's a long-term problem for us. So we just need to stand firm as far as we are concerned.
All right, and that's exactly what we've done in the last 3 years. So, Suhasini, before I wrap this chat up, you said this is an unnecessary controversy that the Chinese side have kicked up. There's something called diplomatic niceties. You simply don't say who called for a meeting, and yet they have done it. And they have done it ahead of the G20 summit in New Delhi. Do you see a link, and is there any confirmation about whether Xi Jinping will actually come down or not? Because today the Russian president has sort of clarified that he's not coming.
Well, as far as I do understand, there is no formal confirmation yet of the Chinese president. Obviously, the two leaders would have spoken about it, but none of the Ministry of External Affairs is official are yet confirming whether he is coming. We understand that in Delhi, the hotels have been now sorted out, so everybody knows where they're going to be staying. So the rooms are booked. It's a question of whether or not Mr. Xi Jinping comes. One must remember that while India would, of course, like to have every guest of the G20 here, it is also in China's interest to show up at the meeting, because China has been at the forefront of insisting that it would not allow geopolitical issues to be brought up in the joint declaration. So if China wants to ensure that its objections are heard properly, then it would seem like it should have its leader attend the leadership meeting as well. So I think from both sides, there are pressing reasons to actually come together at the G20 in Delhi. But there is no confirmation yet. And as you pointed out, we already have one cancellation, that of Vladimir Putin from Russia.
All right, Suhasini, we'll leave it there for the moment. Thank you very much. General Hooda, thank you very much for joining us this evening on our lead story at 8 o'clock. Thank you so much. As Suhasini just pointed out, the next possible meeting between Prime Minister Modi and Xi Jinping probably will be next month here in Delhi when the G20 gets underway. Some suspense there, but chances are he will attend. But there is now complete clarity on Russian President Vladimir Putin. He will not be attending the G20 summit. Russia confirmed that Putin had no plans to attend the G20 in Delhi in person, and that his main focus right now is on the special military operation currently underway in Ukraine, essentially the war that Russia has launched on Ukraine. Earlier this week, Mr. Putin also skipped the BRICS Summit held in South Africa. Putin has been avoiding international travel since the International Criminal Court issued an arrest warrant against him, accusing him of war crimes against Ukraine. Staying with the G20, it is Prime Minister Modi and India's big moment under the diplomatic sun. Ahead of that, the New Delhi Municipal Corporation has issued an advisory for 8th, 9th and 10th of September, the duration of the summit. Those visiting central Delhi and the main venue during the G20 summit have been asked to travel by metro and avoid any private mode of transport. People entering Delhi from the airport will be allowed entry only after verification of their IDs. Restaurants, malls and markets will remain shut in the MDMC area, but essential services like milk booths, medical stores will remain open. Essentially, Delhi getting back into lockdown mode for the 3 days of the G20 summit. These are, of course, for security reasons, reasons that we completely understand. Okay.